Hello, this is the summary video for the Child Development course section on adolescence, that period of time in childhood, the end of childhood, where so many interesting things are happening in the lives of kids, hormonal changes, mood swings, the additional pressure of making decisions for yourself for the first time in your life, where to go to college, what you want to do for a career. All of those things combine to make it a very challenging time, and it's a time of life where a lot of things can go right, other things may not go as well, but the fact that you are in this course and moving forward with your life suggests that you got through it okay. So you'll be able to think about some of your experiences, more recent experiences, as you go through the ideas and concepts that are raised in this chapter. So we're talking about chapters 13, 14, and 15. Chapter 13 addresses the physical development of adolescence. The genetic, biological, environmental, and social factors all interact in adolescent development. They face dramatic biological changes. Their relationships take on a different form. Their moments with their peers become more intimate. Dating, sexual exploration, and possibly intercourse are taking place for the first time in their lives. Thoughts are more abstract and idealistic, and biological changes trigger a heightened interest in body image. The slides in the chapter review important points about positive and negative views held during adolescence. An important response is the positive youth development approach, which is explained in the video on slide 6. So I urge you to pay close attention to that. As we said, adolescents are undergoing the transition from childhood to adulthood physically, as well as cognitive and emotionally. And puberty is the process by which they go through the physical changes during this time of life. The specific changes are addressed in the text and the slides. They're things that you're familiar with from your bio classes in high school, as well as, again, your own fairly recent experiences for most of you. Excuse me, the specific timing of these changes varies for each adolescent. Variations are determined by genetic factors, but also environmental factors such as nutrition. In recent years, research has shown that it's happening earlier on average in the lives of teenagers. During this period, adolescents develop their sexuality and their sexual identity. This period is characterized by risk-taking behaviors and consequently increased risk for sexually transmitted infections and pregnancy. Take a look at the chart on STIs, sexual transmitted infections, on slide 27, and the video on teen pregnancy, which is the link for that is found on slide 31. Adolescents' physical health, like for all children, is influenced by healthy or unhealthy eating habits, exercise, and getting enough sleep. All of these can be challenging for adolescents who are generally not subject to the same level of supervision by parents and caretakers as younger children. You're familiar with that. The chapter concludes with discussion of additional challenges faced by some adolescents: substance use, eating disorders. Watch the video on eating disorders, which is found, the link for that is found on this final slide. Chapter 14 addresses the cognitive development of adolescence. According to Dr. Piaget, the fourth and final stage of cognitive development is the formal operational stage. It begins in the early teenage years, 11 years old, according to Piaget, and characteristics of formal operational thought include the ability for the first time in their lives to have abstract thinking, make logical inferences. They develop enhanced verbal problem-solving abilities, more focus on thought in its abstract qualities, thoughts full of idealism and possibilities for some adolescents, and then hypothetical deductive reasoning, which involves creating a hypothesis and deducing its implications, which provide ways to test the hypothesis. Now, you're familiar with the scientific method from your high school science classes, but in fact, everyone uses different versions of that message just to make their own decisions in their lives, and adolescents are doing that for themselves for the first time. There's a discussion about adolescent egocentrism, and that is a sense that everything in the world is about me. Everybody's looking at me. A heightened sense of self-consciousness exists in some adolescents. Psychologist David Elkind dissects adolescent egocentrism into two types of social thinking. Some teens think that they have an imaginary audience. This is the feeling, you may have had it yourself, that one is the center of attention and is on stage. And again, that notion, as I said a minute ago, everyone is looking at me and paying attention to how I'm dressed today. Or everybody can see the big, fat, juicy zit that popped out on my forehead overnight. And I've got to do everything I can to cover it up. Another aspect, personal fable. A sense of personal uniqueness, invincibility, or invulnerability on the part of some adolescents can obviously have very dangerous implications if carried to extremes. So watch the short video and note the cartoon illustration from the Zits comic strip that nicely illustrate the concept of adolescent egocentrism. Adolescents are developing decision-making skills. That's a big focus in the positive youth development approach that I mentioned earlier. They have their own value system. While they are influenced by family and community, they are also able to develop their own sense of values. There's a discussion in the chapter about moral education. Service learning is an increasingly often used aspect of adolescent education in high schools. Religion is also a factor that can expose youth to positive pro-social values and value systems. The chapter concludes with a discussion of adolescent education, discussing the transitions between elementary, middle, and high school. And there's an additional focus on academic challenges in high schools and the impact of dropping out of high school. Watch the short video embed where the link is on the last slide about Dr. Comer's thoughts on student-centered high schools. Last chapter in the text, chapter 15 addresses the socio-emotional development of adolescents. Identity is a key aspect of adolescent development. Erik Erikson's fifth stage in his framework, developmental psychology, is identified is labeled as identity versus identity confusion. Adolescents are faced with deciding who they are and what they are about. This transition is aided by a gap between childhood security and adult autonomy. This doesn't happen overnight. As adolescents, as teens mature, they negotiate with their parents for additional freedoms. Curfews are extended, for example. So it makes it an easier transitional time for experimentation. And it's not as if you wake up one morning and, oh, I'm an adult, I have to do all this stuff for myself. But identity confusion can happen, and individuals who experience that either withdraw, isolate themselves, or immerse themselves in the world of their peers. You know, we see that on occasion, for example, youths who immerse themselves in social media, spend virtually all their time online, creating sort of an artificial world that has less contact, less in touch with reality. Take a good look at the work of Dr. James Marshall. His work is discussed in the text. There are a number of slides that summarize his work, and a really good video that you should watch and pay attention to. He breaks adolescent identity down into 4 status levels. Diffusion occurs in individuals who have not yet experienced a crisis or made any commitments or are still unsure of themselves. Foreclosure addresses teens who have made a commitment but have not been tested, have not experienced a crisis. Identity moratorium addresses individuals who are in the midst of a crisis, but whose commitments are either absent or vaguely defined. And then finally, most adolescents at some point get to the level of what he identifies as achievement, who have undergone a crisis, made a commitment, and are feeling pretty secure about themselves and moving forward as a responsible adult. See the chart and the link to a video on slide 5 where Dr. Marcia himself will expand on these ideas and give you some examples and details. Some additional factors that influence adolescent identity. Certainly the family. Within a family, any child, and particularly adolescents, look for a balance between their own individuality and a sense of connectedness and belonging within a family unit. They develop more intense, more intimate peer and romantic relationships, which are important for a positive sense of self. For some teens, their sense of ethnic identity is an important part of their overall sense of self. In some teams, this is an enduring aspect of self that includes a sense of membership in an ethnic group and attitudes and feelings that are related to the membership in that ethnic group. Early adolescence, the early teen years, is a time when emotional highs and lows increase. Emotions become more changeable and more fleeting. Moodiness is normal. Alternatives to traditional notions of femininity and masculinity have emerged for some teens. They're seen as masculinity and femininity are seen as less a continuum and more as traits that can be possessed by one individual to varying degrees. The concept of androgyny, the presence of positive masculine and feminine characteristics in the same individual. So I suggest you watch this video on transgenderism where you can find the link on slide 15 in this chapter slide there. Adolescents and their relationships with parents and caretakers are often associated with occasional or, in some cases, frequent conflict. I'm sure you remember some of your own experience in that regard. See the discussion about the back and forth between attachment and independence as explained in a chart, the lecture notes, and as often, there is a video that expands on that further and gives some role plays that will be interesting to see. Additional information is presented about adolescent friendships, romantic relationships, peer groups. Again, recall your own experiences with various cliques and other groupings in your own high school, and that discussion, I'm sure, will resonate with you, particularly those of you who are only a year or two removed from your adolescent years. Culture plays an important role in the lives of adolescents, especially within families with a strong ethnic identity. Some cultural groups have important rites of passage, which youth are expected to experience and they become key benchmarks in their emergence as adults. For example, the Catholic faith has confirmation. The Jewish faith has bar mitzvah. In Latino communities, the quinceañera is an important rite of passage for teenage girls. I'm sure you're more than familiar with the impact of social media on the lives of adolescents and how it has taken on increased importance. It's a venue where all of the issues we've discussed so far play out in sometimes very intense ways. Watch the video on that on slide 34. And the chapter concludes with discussion of additional emotional challenges faced by adolescents that can result in juvenile delinquency, depression, suicide. Then there's a discussion of programs and interventions that address those challenges and that are consistent with the positive youth development approach that, again, I've mentioned a few times as we've gone through this discussion. So that concludes a quick summary of the issues in the adolescent chapters in the textbook in the course. And it concludes the course. I hope you've enjoyed your time in the course and good luck to you in the future. Thank you very much.